Now, Facebook's all-new rebrand into Meta Platforms has definitely created some major headlines as the company positions itself as the default leader in the metaverse race. But I'm sure that Mark Zuckerberg didn't expect one of those headlines to be about Meta stock having wiped out the largest amount of shareholder value in stock market history. However, all jokes aside, if you filter out all the political agenda and opinionated hit pieces against this company, Facebook stock has potentially become an insanely good deal with its recent crash. In this video, I'll be going over exactly why the media might be exaggerating Meta's somewhat mediocre earnings, do an analysis of its underlying growth opportunity, and at the end I'll share an estimate of how much upside this stock could really have for the rest of this year. But before we get into it, guys, make sure to drop me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And obviously, with the recent rebrand of Facebook, there's been a lot of controversy as to whether or not what Facebook did with its Meta Platforms username and obviously its shift into the metaverse is really just a PR or a marketing stunt. And to be honest, as an investor, I really don't care about what people think because Facebook has definitely been a very hated company for a very long period of time and the stock price has clearly not reflected that. So from an investor standpoint of view and somebody who's looking for good value and growth stocks right now in this market, I'm looking at Meta Platforms from a very unique point of view because believe it or not, this stock right now is the cheapest out of the entire big tech growth stock basket, which includes stocks like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Apple. And so if we're anticipating this higher interest rate and higher inflation environment in 2022, we're obviously going to look towards these bigger tech companies that have very established platforms. And if you're looking at it from a purely value standpoint, Meta Platforms is definitely the best buy out of all the FANG stocks. But obviously with the recent earnings report, there's been a little bit of a concern as to whether or not Meta can actually contain their growth with the advent of platforms like Snapchat and TikTok. And this is where I think a lot of people are making a mistake when analyzing Facebook's daily active user growth that was released in their latest earnings report. Because essentially what people saw is that Facebook lost daily users for the first time ever last quarter in 2021. But if you really think about it, Facebook is a platform that's used by almost 1 out of every 3 people on this planet. And so do we really expect Facebook to continue growing its daily active user count this decade when we have so much competition coming from so many other companies? And as we all know, Facebook is what kicked off the social media hype earlier last decade, so it's completely natural in my opinion for a company like Facebook and their app to start slowing their growth. And what people don't realize is that Meta's underlying business is extremely profitable and the company has very little leverage. And it looks like people also tend to forget that Meta has many other apps under its basket like Instagram and obviously WhatsApp. And if you've ever lived in a country in Europe, Asia, or Africa, you know that WhatsApp is by far one of the most popular texting messaging apps in the entire world, and billions of people use it every single day. And obviously that's a very similar scenario with Instagram in the United States, and Instagram's business model profitability has continued to increase for Facebook over the past couple of years as more and more people are posting ads on that specific app. And as you guys can see, this is most definitely very clearly reflected in Meta's financials as their revenue and net income have consistently grown quarter over quarter. And even though the media makes it seem like Facebook endured this very large loss last quarter, and although the media makes it seem like Facebook endured a very large loss last quarter, their actual net income actually increased from the prior quarter, and overall over the past 5 years, it's in a very healthy uptrend. And as you guys can see, that's being driven by very strong revenue growth, which is very impressive for a company that's trading at a forward price to earnings ratio of only around $15. And as you guys can see, this company has basically no leverage and a lot of cash on the balance sheet, which means that this company has a lot of room to continue to invest in itself and potentially even pay dividends down the road. And it's these kind of companies that do very well in a high inflation and a high interest rate environment, especially when the valuation is so cheap. And as you guys can see, it's a very similar story for the free cash flow and operating cash flow of this business as the company has continued to expand its revenue streams through all its different apps. Now, obviously, over the next few quarters, I do expect these financial numbers to become a little bit more suppressed because Meta is obviously investing so much into their metaverse platform. And their Reality Labs division has definitely become a very major focus for this company as they try to cement their position as a leader in the metaverse race. But it does seem like that Wall Street has been taking this capital expenditure too seriously in the short term at least. And on top of that, in the short term, even though the metaverse looks like a scam or just a marketing stunt, the actual market growth opportunity is pretty significant at a compound annual growth rate of around 44% over the next 8 years. And we need to keep in mind that the hybrid work model is going to stay in our community for a very long period of time, as people are realizing that commuting to work, at least for corporate offices, is not very time efficient and is definitely not helping the environment either. And since obviously in their Reality Labs division, Meta is working on exactly these technologies, there's a pretty big opportunity for Meta to capitalize on this with their AR and VR headsets. And as you guys can see, unlike what many people think, outside of the consumer sector, there are many other markets that Meta can target for their VR AR headset and their market adoption. And obviously gaming is also going to play a pretty crucial role in this, as people are going to be able to experience their video games with their closest friends much better through Meta's different technologies. And so even though Meta had a very poor earnings report in the short term, primarily due to all their investments, in the long term, over the next couple of years, their Reality Labs division should definitely act as a tailwind for their business model, because as we all know, Meta has a lot of cash on hand and they have a lot of liquidity available to invest in these very different ventures. And so if in the worst case their Facebook app starts to lose some of its user growth and it starts to lose its advertising revenue from TikTok and Snapchat, then there are still a lot of other business aspects that Meta can fall upon that includes Instagram, WhatsApp, and obviously Oculus. Now, obviously, just like any stock in the stock market, there's going to be risks that Facebook is going to be facing in the short term. And I see that primarily coming in the form of potential advertising cuts from a lot of companies as consumer spending kind of slows down in 2022. But the good thing is that this might not specifically affect Facebook's platforms only, as we'll see this kind of vary across Snapchat, TikTok, and all these other big social media players. And obviously, apart from the competition side, there's also going to be pressure on Facebook to potentially fight regulatory or data acquisition policies that could be enforced by lawmakers or just general technology agencies, which will obviously affect Facebook's ad business model to a certain extent. But if you have consistent cash flow and a very good growth in your ad revenue per user like Facebook, then you're definitely going to have a much easier time navigating a lot of these external pressures. And as for Meta's stock price itself, you guys can see that we are at an oversold territory that we have never seen in the history of this entire stock ever since we IPO'd back in 2012. And the very interesting part is that whenever we've seen a lot of controversy around Facebook, we've always seen the stock price react to the downside in the short term. But as you guys can see, after a couple of years, the stock really just recovers and continues on its massive bull run. And I definitely expect history to repeat itself at this time around as well. But obviously, since the stock market in the short term is a voting machine, we're definitely going to see a lot more volatility and more downside on Facebook stock, in my opinion, to around this $205 level. Now, as a full disclosure, I've been adding Facebook shares over the past few days as well, because I just can't resist not buying when the stock is down so much over the past couple of weeks. But obviously with the March interest rate hikes, I definitely am saving some cash for a potential continued dip on this stock to around this 205 and that 177 level. And as crazy as this might sound, the risk to reward on Facebook right now is definitely unmatched in the entire big tech sector, not only from a fundamental standpoint, but also from a technical standpoint. As you guys can see, if we get above this $250 level, we have a massive gap all the way to this $325 region, which means that if we see some momentum flow back into large cap stocks, we could see Facebook be one of the biggest runners in the short term. And as you guys can see, whenever the RSI has hit these very extended levels to the downside, we've always seen some very aggressive bounce backs in this specific stock over the following weeks. Now this time might be a little different with the expected market volatility that we're seeing right now, but in the long term, if everything stays the same fundamentally, this stock should definitely outperform with the rest of the market. But anyways guys, make sure to drop me a thumbs up if you found some value from this video. Let me know down in the comment section below what you guys think of Facebook stock, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.